This is breaking news.
Thanks for staying with us. We continue to cover today's breaking news. New York City Mayor Eric Adams just spoke publicly for the first time since the Justice Department ordered federal prosecutors to drop corruption charges against him.
In a memo explaining the dismissal, the DOJ said that the case interferes with both Adams' campaign in the 2025 mayoral election and his ability to cooperate with President Trump's immigration crackdown.
For some more insights, we are joined now by Hofstra law professor James Sample. James, do we have you there?
Yes,
there you are. Great to see you, as always. First off, Professor, what's your initial reaction to what the mayor had to say today?
Well, the mayor is certainly trying to spin this, as any politician would in these circumstances, as though the case was dropped because he was innocent. The interesting thing about that is that we have the memo from the Justice Department that Cindy just referenced, and it could not be more explicit in indicating that, in fact, the Justice Department says straight out that it ordered the dismissal of this case against Mayor Adams, quote, without assessing the strengths of the case against him, which is an astonishing statement, especially since one of the reasons that they justify the dismissal is the idea that this was a politically motivated prosecution based on Adams' comments about the Biden administration's immigration approach, and that is, therefore, it was a political prosecution. And yet in this very memo, they are only citing politics and not the merits of the case as the reason for dismissing it. So for Adams to then turn around and say, as I told you all along, I'm innocent. This shows I'm innocent. I was always doing the work of the people of New York. In fact, as you referenced earlier, he said, I'm you. Well, how many of you New Yorkers, or we New Yorkers, are doing favors for the Turkish government, or are soliciting foreign contributions in an election campaign, or are allegedly, all of these things are merely allegedly in the initial indictment against him, defrauding the New York City public finance system to the tune of hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of dollars? That's not the average New Yorker. This is an incredible gift from Donald Trump to Mayor Adams. The question, I think, that is clearly implicated is, whenever has Donald Trump given gifts without expecting a return on investment? What's the return on that investment in terms of what Mayor Adams is going to give him?
But don't you think it's sort of obvious in the memo, or at least implied in the memo, this prevents him from assisting the Trump administration's deportation efforts, right? It would seem as if he is crucial to that effort, and therefore that's sort of the return on investment.
Absolutely. It's as brazen a quid pro quo trade, a transactional dismissal. Now, there's a footnote in which the Deputy Attorney General, the acting Attorney General now, says this isn't an express quid pro quo, but the memo does lay it out. It's as crystal clear as can be, and one really has to wonder, if we are a country that believes in the rule of law, and New York has been the epicenter of this test of, is the law something that truly applies to everyone equally? Well, we've seen the dismissal of the cases against Donald Trump at the federal level related to January 6th and the 2020 election. Now we've seen the dismissal of the case against Mayor Adams. It's not clear to me that the law is being applied to powerful political leaders in the same way it's applied to average rank-and-file citizens.
Professor, the charges against Adams can be reconsidered after the mayoral election, November 2025. What is the likelihood of that ever happening?
I think it's highly, highly unlikely. But as Marcia said in the segment earlier today, I think that the dismissal without prejudice does give President Trump a little bit of a hook, a little bit of a leash to remind Mayor Adams, I ordered these charges could be dismissed without prejudice. If you don't do my bidding, just remember, I could order them to reinstate the charges. Now, they wouldn't have to follow through on that, just as the Southern District doesn't have to follow through on this. But practically speaking, the Southern District answers to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice answers to the Attorney General. The Attorney General right now clearly is answering to President Trump. I think what that dismissal without prejudice means is not that it's going to be refiled, but just that there's still a leash on Mayor Adams.
Mm-hmm. So short term, I think it's safe to say this is great news for the mayor. Long term, however, how do you think this impacts his reelection chances?
It's hard to say, and as you discussed in the earlier segment, I think the reality of mayoral politics in New York, and one of the reasons that Mayor Adams was elected, and it looked like he wasn't going to be elected when he was, is the participation rates in New York City primary elections. It's all about turnout. I mean, the primary turnout often hovers in the 20% of eligible voters. So he will be the Mayor Adams vote, and all of the other candidates on some level will be the non-Mayor Adams vote. So if they have to divide up that piece of the pie, how many of them are getting a serious chunk of that? Adams may, frankly, at this point, wish very much for numerous candidates to enter the race because they'll all be perceived as not Adams.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Now, aren't allegations of public corruption relevant to voters? And is it the DOJ's role to help advance the president's agenda?
Those are both great questions, Cindy. I think the reality is that allegations of corruption are historically very, very serious. I mean, what is public corruption but a betrayal of the public trust, a putting of self-interest or the interest of interested bodies, special interests, in this case, arguably the government of Turkey, allegedly, ahead of the voters of New York. That, you would think, would be very important to the voters of New York, and you would think that the Department of Justice would absolutely want to facilitate the fact-finding that began in 2021 when Adams was still Brooklyn Borough president.
All right, Professor Samples, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate your time.